Good morning. Oh, thanks. There's always a conspiracy. I hope it works this time. Fantastic. So usually he conspires against me with this so that I keep pressing it. Morning, everyone. So because of time, I will just start with the presentation. I promise I will get to the questions. But if you have more questions, just put them in. I want to do a very quick run through the scope of trustee agreements. Now, trustee agreements is a bit of a misnomer because you don't have anything called a trustee agreement. Vanessa will be here immediately after me to talk about the trust deed, which is the main agreement for trustees. So what I want to do is rather talk to you about the whole landscape of agreements that are relevant to a trustee. As he said, my name is Brian Muindi. I head the Corporate and Commercial Department at OK Law. I never get tired of saying at these conferences that we have structured 3/4 of the REITs, and we act for a majority of the trustees. So this is really an area that we are very passionate about, and we love to support RAC and what they are doing. With that marketing done and out of the way, I will start with the key before. No, so stop the time.
No, it's not the time. Oh. No, it's 1 second. You're being accused of being a preacher, so from here till there, just walk that way, because the cameras are following you.
The cameras. Sorry, I was focusing on the people in the room so that everyone, but for those at home, welcome, thank you for joining us. I will try and restrict my movements to this part here. So, a trustee. I think we all are aware about what the role of the trustee is. This is relevant not just to the trustees in the room or potential trustees in the room, but to anyone who will be interacting with the trustee. Whether you're the fund manager, the REIT manager, whether you're the property manager, whether you are the promoter, the trustee is really you can think of the trustee as the board of an entity. The trustee is the be-all and end-all. But the trustee rarely, if ever, has to do the daily operations. The trustee has to be aware about all this. So it is part of everyone in that value chain must be informed and must make the trustee's life a little bit easier. So when you look at the regulations, you will see that it lists, I think it's on 2 or 3 pages, all the powers, duties, responsibilities of trustees. They are several. As lawyers like to say, joint and several. So in reality, the trustee does not actually get into, for example, the property management agreement. A lot of the things that the regulations require, remember the trustee has the power to donate or to give someone else the responsibility of whatever they're supposed to do. So you will find in reality, when it comes to these agreements, they're being entered into by, for example, the REIT manager, but the trustee must approve. So if you're the promoter, you're the REIT manager, you must make sure that by the time this agreement is going to the trustee, it is already in compliance with whatever the trustee is supposed to ensure. So do not think that because you're not the trustee, you're not interested in, it is not your responsibility to make sure that any of these things are done. It cascades all the way. Now, when does a trustee's role begin? You will find that before you set up the REIT, the trustee must be involved. As you're putting together your team of advisors, that is the point at which you engage the trustee. Technically, the trustee will be appointed through the trust deed. But remember, the trust deed is a document you're giving to CMA. The trust deed is a document that says this is how it's going to operate. But at what point do I engage with the trustee? So do I do a trust deed, get my advisors in the room, finish, and then just before we go to CMA, bring in the trustee and tell the trustee, here's the trust deed for you to approve. Again, because remember, everything is the trustee's responsibility, you have to involve the trustee very early on. For the trustees in the room, you know, where before you start, before the REIT can begin, that's this point at which you engage with the promoter. So for the most part, the key first entities or parties who are involved before we go to CMA with the draft scheme documents and say these are the draft scheme documents is the trustee. So the trustee, of course, and the other advisors, because you need, I think, tax, legal, those are the ones, financial, you will find them being involved at that early on stage. So technically at this stage, you actually do not have an agreement. Now, I'll talk about 2 agreements that you will sign with the trustee, but they are conditional. Because what happens if you do this and then CMA either does not approve, or in the case of one, I think, second REIT that attempted to go to market, you don't get the 7 independent investors, what happens? So you have agreements that come before you actually do the trust deed. The two of them, now, under the regulations, I'll give you this agreements shortly. Under the regulations, you have a scheme, a bunch of documents which are referred to as scheme documents. Scheme is the REIT scheme. So the scheme documents will be now the trust deed itself. You'll have a prospectus, or it could be an offering memorandum. This is what now invites potential investors to tell them about the REIT. These documents are listed in the regulations as the scheme documents. They're the first documents that I would call, quote unquote, as trustee agreements. Because, for example, when it comes to the prospectus or the offering memorandum, the regulations provide that the trustee, it is not the trustee's responsibility, of course, to make sure, they're not the ones who are giving the financial information, for example. But under the regulations, that OM or prospectus is being issued by the trustee and the promoter. So, as a trustee, I want to make sure that the promoter who is writing these things, that the accountants who have prepared the documentation, this document may not have my name, but it says there that I am the trustee. So, as the promoter, you will also want to make sure that you make it easy for your trustee to ensure that they're given an accurate document. You have any document, I think the REIT management is likely one of the ones where you might find the trustee's name indicated. But the trust deed is the one that you would find. The REIT management, it depends on the REIT manager, depends also on the trustee. Because now, remember, the REIT manager is in essence the person who's going to run the REIT. This is the day-to-day. But everything they're doing on behalf of the trustee. In some cases, you will find that agreement with the trustee, but more often than not, you'll find the trustee saying, let the agreement be between the REIT and me as trustee. Okay, I'm a trustee of the REIT, but it is not me as the trustee, and the REIT manager. So even though you don't see their name there, the trustee is involved, the trustee is the one who approves. Technically, it's the promoter who's discussing all these things. Because again, remember, CMA has not given you approval. All these things, all the scheme documents that you see here, these are pre-approval. You have to prepare them before you get approval. Because you take drafts of all these documents to CMA. CMA then looks through and says, proceed. Which goes to the first point, that the trustee needs to know what is in each of these documents before they've been submitted to CMA. Then you have the property management agreements, you have memorandum and articles. This is what the regulations say, but you will find in reality, most of the REITs actually operate through LLPs. So instead of memorandum and articles, what you will have is the partnership deeds for those LLPs. Of course, you have to go to CMA and ask for the approval for you to use LLPs as opposed to companies. So where you have memorandum and articles, that is where you have an investee company. We are constantly going, I think as David had mentioned, one of the benefits we have, and I don't know if there's someone from CMA in the room, is our regulators very understanding. You go to the regulator and you say, yes, the provisions talk about a company, but an LLP is what the market will be more beneficial, of course, for your other tax reasons. So even though it's not there in the regulations, investee LLP, in practice, that is what you will find is used. Now, in between the scheme documents and the operation, you've got some operational matters that the trustee needs to be involved in. So those are not scheme documents. These other documents that I'll talk about, but they're very important for the trustee. They fall under these classes. This is a class that I would say I would lump up the rest of the documentation on. Custodial. Remember, under the regulations, the trustee is supposed to have the ownership and control of the REIT assets. So the promoter has got to transfer the assets. They can do this either through the purchase agreements, they can do this through, but then you have an underlying agreement between them and the trustee that says how they will actually go about the custodial relationship. Good news for trustees, you charge additional fees for this because you're providing custodial, which the regulations have mandated you to do, but it is a revenue stream. And then, in addition to that, you then have the fees that the regulations say can be charged for trustee services. You have the financing agreements. I'll talk about a few of these. service agreements. This is with your various service providers, and then your compliance frameworks, which technically is not an agreement, but it is also a scheme of documents that the trustee must approve, must look through. For the most part, what they want to achieve, these agreements, is the bullet points that appear on the left, my left, your other left, since you're facing this way. It's to make sure, and these are the things which are key for a trustee, when it comes to reporting, you're clear whose obligation is it, because you are ceding your control, you're ceding your authority as trustee. The other thing is making sure that you have proper record keeping. I think, for example, one of the things you're required to do as trustee is to maintain a register. There's no trustee that maintains a register. You will appoint a registrar, right? But then you need to make sure that that is being done as the regulations require. Financial management, this is when it comes now to borrowing, and I think there was a question at a point about the borrowing, the gearing ratios. And then your accountability, this is accountability now, either for the REIT managers or for any other service provider that is appointed by the trustee or by the REIT manager. Disclosure, that would be your marketing information, your frequent investor briefings. You've got a number of things under the regulations that the investors or the unit holders have the right to know about and to vote about. And then you've got matters to do with compliance. Now, this could be the financials being done. This could be ensuring that the sale and the purchase of assets is being done as required under the regulations. Custodial, as I said, you will find this is signed, at least in draft form, at the same time as you have the scheme documents. So it is a back office document. It's like almost a management, you will find this agreement is the one that says these will be our terms for the trusteeship, which is usually a percentage of the assets under management. And then for the custodial, this will be our fees. Again, it's a percentage of the assets, and you'll have ratios, not ratios, you'll have like bands. So if it's between this and so on. So it details the trustee's responsibility, and as I said, it is also an additional revenues which you are permitted by the regulations to charge for. Insurance. Now, this is not something that you hear a lot of, but it is extremely important for the trustee. Because, remember, the ownership of the assets and control is the trustee's name. The regulations do provide that the trustee is entitled to limit its liability to the assets of the REIT. It also says that the trustee cannot limit its liability where there has been a breach of its fiduciary responsibilities. So one of the key things you want to make sure, or a trustee will want to make sure, there's also a requirement that all the assets are insured, is one, you've got agreements in place with insurers, whether it is for assets, whether it is PI cover, professional indemnity. You also want to make sure that any agreement, whether it is a scheme document, or as long as it is an agreement between the REIT and an external party, you want to make sure that the liability of the trustee is clearly provided for. So you will want to see this term reflected across all the documents, whether or not it is an insurance agreement. Then you have your financing agreements. So this is lending. This is where I think the trustees usually pay a lot of attention to. They want to make sure that here, because of the gearing ratio that is provided in the regulations, because of their liability and the requirements now for them to make sure that the assets are invested as required under the regulations, and for purposes of reporting to the unit holders. So financing agreements, whether it is a lending, and I'm going to include asset disposals and asset purchases as a financing agreement. Here, as the trustee, one of the things that the trustee will want to do, even though they're not signing, is be very involved in this agreement. As a promoter, as a REIT manager, you want to involve your trustee as early as possible in these discussions. You do not want to go and negotiate terms with a counterparty or with the lender. Then come back to tell the trustee these are the terms. The trustee looks at them and says, no, I don't think you're able to do this. I don't think it is prudent to do this. So it's important that you carry your trustee with you, even though the trustee is only going to come at the end to approve it. But if you were to just spring it to the trustee with terms, I can tell you that it then becomes a very difficult conversation to have. I talked about investor compliance provisions. You have an indirect agreement with the unit holders as the trustee to make sure that each of them have regular and transparent information. So you don't have an agreement between you and them, but you have an indirect agreement that requires you to do this. You also have a number, or the trustee has a number of reporting obligations that they need to make sure. Again, there's a whole schedule in the regulations, whether it is on financial reporting, whether it is on reporting to the regulator on the activities of the REIT. So you have the agreements with the registrar as well. Anything to do with the REIT engaging with investors or the REIT engaging with the regulators or the unit holders is a matter that will be important to the trustee. It is not a trustee agreement, but it is an agreement that the trustee will have interest in and will want to be involved in it. So from the get-go. Conclusion. In the end, remember, just because the trustee's name does not appear in a document does not mean they are not interested. Just because the document is being presented to the trustee for approval does not mean that you wait for the end of the document to be, the last stage to present it to the trustee. For good order, you should make sure that the trustee is involved in any of these documents, whether it is a scheme document or an operational document, right from the get-go and not at the end. And that ensures that you will be able to conclude transactions in good manner. That is my time. Thank you very much.